Good afternoon and a very happy Easter. If you've put your nose out of doors today, you'll know the best thing is to stay exactly where you are. It's been snowing and sleeting all morning here at Donington. It still is. But before we join round 3 of the Transatlantic Challenge, let's just remind ourselves of what happened yesterday. The first match race was a complete washout for these big talking Americans, but then they got wise.
Kenny Irons leads from Kevin Schwantz into the S's. Then it's Roger Bennett, and Kenny Irons goes through and he forces the American wide. Well, Kenny Irons, a hard bit of riding there.
Schwantz tried a very unusual manoeuvre to go around the outside, and this is more usual. Up the inside goes Schwantz to take the lead on the Suzuki.
Schwantz stayed ahead throughout that race, but his captain Fred Merkel overtook Kenny Irons to put the US first and second.
Merkel wanted to do so well, and 32 points at least for the Americans at the moment, by my reckoning, and probably a few more, so that probably around 40 points, I think, for the Americans.
And of course we can expect the Americans to get better and better through the weekend, because they had the terrible problem of learning a new circuit in very, very freezing cold, wet conditions, and now they're getting to grips with it. They're getting faster and faster, and they'll be very, very hard to beat as the weekend goes on.
So the leaders on the final lap: Kevin Schwantz, number 34, the 22-year-old Texan, and Fred Merkel, the 23-year-old Californian, the man who combined male modelling with a motorcycling career. And Kenny Irons there, he's had a fine ride. Roger Bennett, 2 young British riders. In fact, it's the young men from both teams, Peter, who've done the business in this second race.
Yes, if there was any lack of experience, they're made up with youthful enthusiasm, as we watch Ken Irons and Burnett, 2 of the British hopefuls here. Burnett very, very late on the brakes, making full use of the fact that the new surface is very grippy.
So Kevin Schwantz and a big, big wheelie from Fred Merkel. Third home is Kenny Irons from Britain. 4th is Roger Bennett. And look how those boys are happy. Kevin Schwantz and Fred Merkel, they are beside themselves, and with good reason.
So a deficit of 48 points after the first race, cut now to 34, but Britain still with a more than useful lead of 83 to 49. Barry, the Americans are obviously going to get better and better as this event wears on, but can they pull that back, do you think?
Well, I think yesterday, you see, the first race that they rode in was the first race they'd ever raced in on this circuit, and it was damp conditions. They were on intermediate tyres. Some were on intermediate, some were on full wets. For example, Kevin Schwantz, he put a full wet tyre on the front of the bike, and after 2 laps it all shredded to pieces, and you saw what happened down at Redgate.
Yes, yeah.
But I think now in the second race they really seem to get it together and understand what it was going on. And today with the conditions, I mean, there's no doubt when you look outside that it is raining or snowing, so they will all be on full wet tyres, and I think they'll go good.
It really is foul out there, isn't it? But they do have the superior machinery, don't they?
Well, they do, yeah, because the superbikes were sort of invented, if you like, in America, and all their bikes are specifically designed for the superbike races. But Rob McKelvey in our team, he's got an American bike, so it should be a lot closer today.
A very quick word about the 2 stars, really, yesterday, who were Kevin Schwantz from the States and young Kenny Irons, who might not even have been riding for Britain.
Kenny Irons is a young guy. He used to ride in the Pro-Am series and that, and there was talk that he wasn't even going to be in the match races, and it's a good job he was, because he was the star yesterday. He's ridden really, really gently, and it's going good.
All right, Barry, thanks very much. More from you later. Let's now get down to the grid and join Chris Carter, because round 3 of the Transatlantic Challenge is about to start. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Tony. So there they are, the competitors, and the Americans getting a taste this time of not just riding in the rain, but riding in the sleet and snow. Conditions absolutely awful. The snow, fortunately, not settling, as you can see, but things damp and very cold indeed. But at least the Americans will be in no doubt as to what tyres they should be using this time, Peter.
Yes, certainly they'll need the full wet weather tyres, the large chunky tread patterns that can move the water out of the way. You can see the spray coming up, it's standing on the surface, and you need the big rain grooves to move the water out of the way and let some of the rubber at least touch the surface. But it's still going to be very, very difficult. They've got to wait until the tyres get to some sort of temperature before they'll work properly, and it's a case of feeling their way over the first few laps, definitely.
So we wait and see whether the Americans can reproduce the sort of form that put them back into the contest. certainly both Kevin Schwantz and Fred Merkel were riding with perhaps, let's say, just a little bit more enthusiasm than what a tours might like to have seen. So there is a danger they may go down on this surface. But when you look at the current top point scoring for the teams, Rob McElnay, the British captain, top scorer at the moment with 21 points. But then Kenny Irons and Roger Bennett on 20. So British riders first and second, third in the point scorers. Then Fred Merkel on 17, Kevin Schwantz on 15, Steve Parrish on 8, and then another American, Michel Mercier, or Canadian in fact, with 7, and Dan Chivington on 6. So the Americans are beginning to score points quite regularly, and not just Merkel and Schwantz.
And of course the riders have other problems other than just the road surface. You can see the amount of spray and that around on some of the cameras. Riders following other machines will have spray thrown up in their faces, and that makes it very difficult when they're slipstreaming down the straight. They also have the problem of misting up the inside of their visors when they breathe. You can see the rider there with his tape over his nose. That's so that when he breathes out through his nose, the hot air goes down and out through the bottom of his helmet. He's got holes drilled in the front of his screen, so that he gets cool air in and clears the mist.
Indeed, and there's Fred Merkel with his Arai helmet, and Arai are one of the manufacturers who've actually been able to solve this problem of misting. You remember the British Motorcycle Grand Prix last year, a lot of people in trouble with the helmets misting, and people like Spencer didn't have that problem. Arai appear to have overcome that particular worry, but there we are, on the grid for the start of this third team race, the third of 8 races. And furthest away from us, again, the man who has really made a big impact on the British scene, Kenny Irons, from Luton, a Pro-Am winner. He's on the far side of the grid at the moment. Then, of course, we've got Fred Merkel there, doing so well for the Americans. He must be pleased with himself. In the picture there, on the Loctite Yamaha, number 6 on his helmet, is Steve Parrish. They're now beginning to pull the visors down, seconds away from the start of this third team race. No, we've got a moment of drama, moving people off the grid, and delighted to say both the Skull Bandit Suzuki men are fighting fit. Chris Martin, who fell, and Paul Litten are back. They've been told to watch the starters, the traffic lights. Merkel comes forward, and away they go. And it's Kevin Schwantz and Merkel side by side at the front. And there in the picture, 55, that's Paul Litten, another British boy making a big impact. Paul Litten, the man who leads, and 24.
That's a Ruben McMurtry off onto the grass. He's desperately trying to keep the bike upright and gets back onto the tarmac, very fortunately without falling over.
Living dangerously, but it's Paul Litten leading, and that's the place you want to be if you can. Obviously, the danger is going to go too quick, but you don't want to be in all that spray behind. Dan Chivington was in second place on bike number 53. Let's see where the other people are. There, Roger Bennett, number 9, not used to seeing him down there, and number 15, Glenn Barry, bringing up the tail end.
But it's now the 2 Skull Bandit Suzukis that lead. It's Itten and Chris Martin who lead the race now.
Paul Litten and Chris Martin on the Skull Bandit Suzukis. Both of them fell off in the second team race yesterday. Chris Martin was the man who lay on the track and caused a lot of anxious moments for people. And closing the gap now is Roger Bennett. So it certainly wasn't Roger Bennett in the back of that group. I do apologise to him. Roger Bennett and Roger Marshall on the Rothmans Honda machines. And there you can see how difficult things are. The spray billowing up. British boys in the first 4 positions at the moment.
And it's Chris Martin that's taken the lead momentarily from Itten. They're both side by side going through the new S's section.
And somebody overshot once again on the approach. That was Dan Chivington, who was right up with the leaders early on. So it's Chris Martin, the leader. With 33 is Chris Martin, 55 is Paul Litten. Number 9 is Roger Bennett. So Chris Martin, the motorcycle mechanic from Blackburn in Lancashire, in the Skull Bandit team for the first time. Obviously no ill effects from that tumble yesterday, and he knocked him out. He was taken to the hospital with concussion. Martin the leader at the end of lap 1. Paul Litten in second place. Roger Bennett, number 9, and Bennett looking for the inside line. Bennett's going to go through into second place. Bennett takes second spot from Itten, but and Roger Bennett in big trouble. Roger Bennett discovered only too well how slippery red gate can be, and that allowed Paul Hinton to go back through. Roger Marshall is in fourth spot.
And Roger Marshall has been battling all through the racing so far with terrible problems with his bike. It's been misfiring, it won't rev after a couple of laps. It seems to be working now. The team has changed everything, working up till 11 o'clock last night to sort the bike out, and hopefully number 11 in the fourth place there, Roger Marshall, finally has the machine sorted out.
And Graham McGregor, British boy, in the pits. Graham McGregor, the Australian rider, riding for Britain. This is number 11, Roger Marshall, in fourth place at the moment. Ahead of him, Chris Martin, Paul Hinton, and his teammate, Roger Burnett. 5 times British champion, Roger Marshall, 34 years of age, and he gets better with age. And certainly a fine performance from the British people here, and Kevin Schwantz and Fred Merkel have got to do something if they're going to improve. At the moment, Merkel is in 6th place, and Schwantz is down in 18th spot, so Kevin Schwantz in trouble in the rain at the moment. Still Martin in, Burnett and Marshall. There is Merkel, and Ron Haslam up there in the thick of the action, and that's great to see Ron out of things when conditions are dry, but he was going so well now when conditions are somewhat more difficult.
And it's still a very remarkable performance from Ron Haslam, even considering it's wet. It still doesn't help his speed down the straight, and he's doing very well indeed. But it's the 2 Skull Bandit Suzukis that lead. Back from the new circuit onto the old section, coming along past the start-finish section. 33 is Chris Martin, and second Paul Hinton, third Roger Burnett, and fourth Roger Marshall. Let's have a comment from Barry Sheen.
Well, I was just thinking how well Chris Martin's going, considering that the poor guy was laying unconscious on the racetrack yesterday. He's obviously suffered no ill effects. And seeing Ron Haslam, when you consider that bloke's bike is probably 35 horsepower down on all the others, being as it's a showroom stocker, I think you've got to hand it to the guy. I mean, that shows that he's a quality rider, because he's right up amongst them, you know, so what can you say? He's going very well.
Some impressive British performances all round at the moment, with this man, Chris Martin, knocked unconscious in a fall yesterday afternoon, but having no problems at all now. And Chris Martin is the leader, riding this 4-stroke Suzuki for the very first time, Peter.
Yes, it's a new machine to him. He's never ridden 4-strokes before, but he's getting on well with this bike, which has an aluminium frame and an oil-cooled 4-stroke motor.
And Kevin Schwantz has come into the pits, so obviously he's not happy enough with the conditions to keep going. There is Fred Merkel. Behind him is Ron Haslam. And Burnett through to second place then to split the Skull Bandit Suzukis. And apparently visors steaming up as a problem for some of the riders. That's why Kevin Schwantz come in. We talked about that problem at the start of the race. There is Trevor Nation go through. Fred Merkel and Ron Haslam pressurising the American captain. And Fred Merkel on the wrong side for a moment, and he was lucky that Haslam didn't go through. Well, Ron wanted it to rain and snow, not for the to ruin the racing for everyone, but to actually make his bike a little bit more competitive. And there's Ron riding pillion almost with Fred Merkel.
And that is a bike you could just take out of the showroom floor that Ron Haslam is riding. Number 5 there, absolutely standard on the Just With Racing tyres fitted for the wet weather conditions. A brilliant ride, truly magnificent performance.
Well, Ron was embarrassed and angry, frustrated that he'd not got a machine that would enable him to do what he felt was his best. But he's going well now. Trevor Nation goes through in 5th place. Fred Merkel 6th, there in 7th place. Bike number 5, Ron Haslam, the local boy from Langley Mill, just up the road, off immediately at the end of racing tomorrow to go testing on his Grand Prix bike at the Paul Ricard circuit in the south of France. Ron Haslam. And we're back with the leaders, and Roger Burnett forcing the pace, of course, £5,000 to the top overall point scorer. So although the British lad's quite happy to do their best for the team, Roger Burnett knows that he will pick up 3 extra points by finishing first instead of second, and in with a chance really of heading towards that 5 grand, with Rob McElnay at the moment a fair long way down the picture. McElnay down in 9th place at the moment.
And of course, Burnett now has the psychological advantage of closing in on Martin. Martin has nobody to chase. He doesn't really know what pace he can go at, only that he can keep up the speed. And Burnett closing, taking a yard out of him at every corner.
Well, at the moment, the score, if they keep the positions, will be 58 for Britain and 8 for the USA if they hold their positions as they are. And that's going to make life very difficult indeed for the Americans. But of course, still 5 more races to go after this. It's not over. And the Americans, once again, will have learnt a lot from racing in the pouring rain this time.
Burnett very late on the brakes into this corner, using the fact that the new tarmac is very grippy, uses it right up until the point he crosses the white line there.
The end of the 4th lap, 3 more laps to go. And a quick word with Gary Newman down in the pits.
Kevin Schwantz, what happened to you?
The bike quit running after I come out of the first turn. It would only run on 2 or 3 cylinders, and it'd run off and on, so I thought I'd stay out there and try it. Maybe they were just water in it or something.
Well, you had such a great day yesterday, the Americans, in the 2nd race. You obviously can't adapt to the bad weather here.
Yeah, the weather has a lot to do with it, and these guys, you know, this is where they always ride, so they're a lot better in the weather than we are. I was, you know, I was running 3rd behind the 2 Suzukis, I believe it was. It was Roger Burnett and Chris Martin. And come out of the corner, and it just all in his face, so that's about all I can say.
We're back with the new race leader, Roger Burnett, holding the lead from Chris Martin. And Roger Marshall now putting the pressure in 3rd place, getting closer, and further back down the field, Ron Haslam has gone ahead of Fred Merkel. So good news for Haslam fans and more bad news for the Americans. And side by side, almost, Roger Marshall and Chris Martin. Now, Roger Marshall isn't the greatest fan of the world of Chris Martin, is he, Peter?
No, it's a rather unfortunate incident yesterday where Martin touched Roger Marshall, but that's Paul Lydon, I think, who's gone straight on, lost a bit of ground. So we're watching Roger Marshall chasing Martin, but it wasn't really Martin's fault as another rider moved over and more or less pushed him into Roger Marshall. So there's the 3 of them now. Now Martin knows that his only chance really of winning this one is to quickly get past Burnett, because once Marshall gets past, he's really going to struggle. So if he's going to attack for the lead, it's got to be soon before Marshall can pass him. And look at that braking manoeuvre from Chris Martin, right up the inside, taking a lead out of Burnett's back and takes the lead, moves over, takes his line. Brilliant piece of riding, but Burnett comes back underneath him and they accelerate side by side down the straight.
And it looks as though Roger Burnett's bike is just fractionally quicker than Martin, but Martin has the better line on the inside, but Burnett just lobs the bike over in front of him, keeps the tight line, prevents Martin from going back through the inside, and that allows Roger Marshall to close. So we have 3 British riders battling not just for points but for money. Remember, £5,000 for the top point scorer, and these men all believe that they've got enough races left to claw themselves up the points table. And Chris Martin finds himself back in 3rd spot, and you can see problems there with visibility.
Yes, Martin has got the spray of these 2 riders in his face now and had to lift his visor. That's very, very difficult. You imagine those spots of rain and mist are now hammering into his face at about 130, 140 miles an hour. They're causing him a lot of pain and a lot of visibility problems. So really he has lost out to the 2 Honda riders now, who don't seem to be suffering any visibility problems at all. And Burnett and Marshall charging ahead of the field.
So Roger Burnett, Roger Marshall going through, the Rothmans Honda duo in the lead. In 3rd place is Chris
Marshall
Martin.
takes the lead, but Burnett tries to go back up the inside. Really tricky stuff from the 2 of them, pushes Roger Marshall wide. There's no team orders. That pushed Marshall up right onto the curb, and he was very lucky that he didn't slide off on the wide line on the inside of the corner.
Well, I wouldn't have thought that's really the sort of place Roger and Roger should have been trying to dispute the lead. That put them both in a certain amount of jeopardy, and they're well clear. Certainly a lot of rivalry between these 2. Friendly rivalry maybe, but no quarter given or asked, I think, Peter.
Yeah, no team orders here, and bear in mind that Roger Burnett was leading Houston mechanic for Roger Marshall, and that's an American tail ender that caused Roger Marshall a problem. Then he went wide, and that's lost him a few yards on Burnett.
1 lap to go, 6 laps completed. of Paul Lindner, who's lost a couple of places, whether Paul's in trouble. There are the race leaders, Roger Burnett and Roger Marshall.
Now, Roger Marshall tried overtaking manoeuvres and succeeded a couple of times on that last lap. He's going to have to rethink things again because Burnett led him across the line, and he'll both know that this is the last lap. So it'll be interesting to see what Marshall tries here. He's going up the inside for a look, see if he can get past Burnett. An unusual place to try and pass, and he thinks better of it. It's far more likely that it will pass on one of the braking areas at the end of the lap, but there are now 3 braking points, the chicane and 2 hairpins.
Quick rundown of the leading positions. Burnett and Marshall leading. Chris Martin in 3rd place, then Ron Haslam, then Fred Merkel, then Paul in behind Paul Lindner, Trevor Nation in 7th place, and in 8th spot is Rob McElnay, the British captain.
But both these riders now thinking about the last corners. Burnett's thinking how he's going to have to cover himself from attack from Marshall. Marshall's not trying now. He's probably going to leave it until the last corner, because he knows if he passes Burnett into this hairpin coming up, that Burnett will only repass him at the last one.
So we can expect an overtaking attempt from Roger Marshall, not on this new hairpin, the Melbourne hairpin, but at Goddard, the top of this rise where the new circuit comes back onto the old section, and I think Roger Marshall is too far behind to make a serious charge. I think Burnett stretched the advantage far enough. I think Burnett is going to do it. A good ride from the young man from South Humberside. This could be Roger Burnett's year. Roger Burnett wins. Roger Marshall takes 2nd place. We're waiting now to see who's going to go through in 3rd spot.
And Ron Haslam takes 3rd.
Finishes 3rd. Passes Chris Martin, and that really is excellent news for Ron Haslam fans. He's charged through in great style. In 5th, but in 4th place, then Fred Merkel, who obviously followed the charge through. So let's just recap then on the result, which would likely to give the British teams 57 points and the Americans 9. Roger Burnett the winner, Roger Marshall in 2nd place, Ron Haslam in 3rd spot, 4th Fred Merkel, 5th is Chris Martin, 6th Paul Lindner, 7th Trevor Nation, and a fine performance there from Roger Burnett, and the British team go further and further ahead. A fine performance, more action.
Welcome back to Donington, and let's just check on the score at the moment after 3 of the 8 races. It's 141 to Britain, 57 to the USA, a long way behind there. Let's go down to the pits now, where Gary Newbon's talking to Ron Haslam, who did so magnificently to finish 3rd in that last race on a showroom bike.
Yes, I'm wondering, that was a marvellous performance, Ron. What would you have done on a real racing bike instead of a showroom job?
I know, it was pretty hard because we couldn't get bikes, but that's the only chance I've got. If it rains, it slows everybody down, so they ain't got quite so much speed on me, and the ground clearance is not such a big problem because in the wet, obviously, the slide earlier, as soon as you put slick tyres on it, in the dry, everything grinds and I can't get near them.
How hard was it for you?
It was very hard. The hardest thing is trying to slide it, but only a small way so you don't lose traction. So if you slide it too far, you lose that much traction, then you start falling back. So it's, mentally, it was very hard.
With this rain teeming down, have you suddenly got a chance in this competition?
Yeah, if the rain keeps up, yeah, and obviously not to start on the back row next time, I should be able to be, more up the front.
Okay, well, it's a marvellous performance. I should think Barry Sheen's got something to say about that. Let's go back and join and see what he's got to say about it.
Thank you.
Observations on that race, Barry?
Well, full points to Ron Haslam, because when you consider how slow that bike, he should be delivering letters around London on, it's just a standard bike. He rode very, very well. I was a bit surprised that the 2 Rogers were racing with one another. I mean, yeah, you could have a bit of a... Oh, sure, it's good for the spectators, but when it gets as close as it was getting and it looked a bit hairy, you've got the chance of bringing one another off, which is a bit embarrassing then, isn't it? But,
the American challenge really disappeared, didn't it?
Well, it did, because we can't exactly say how well Kevin Schwantz's going to go, because he was lying 3rd apparently when the engine cut out. So I wouldn't write him off altogether. They're quite brave, these Yanks.
Not to say a little risque.
Oh yes, you could say that.
Especially Fred Merkel, who I think finished 5th or 4th or 5th, I'm not quite sure there. But
yeah, I was surprised actually, because the way he was going in the damp yesterday, I thought for
Suicide,
sure he's going to fall down, but he obviously found out the conditions were really slippery and rode accordingly.
Just tell me, how dangerous is it out there in these conditions?
Well,
especially at Donington, where the water lies on the surface a bit.
It's so unpredictable. What happens, you come into a corner and you're perfectly set up for the corner, and you can just be 3 inches one way or the other and touch a slippery bit and the front end's gone. Yeah, it's very, very difficult. And on a day like this, temperature's well down, so the tyres take a long time to heat up. It's not nice conditions at all.
Not nice conditions for watching either, is it?
No.
Well, we've got the two Rogers going at it, as you were saying, a little bit dangerous.
Now you see here, Roger lays the bike, the second Roger lays the bike down really hard to the right, and it bottoms the suspension.
Roger Marshall.
Yeah, Roger Marshall. And it's so easy then when the suspension's bottom to hit a bump, and it just flicks the back end out and you're run for the Band-Aid time.
Yes, at least it made a contest of it, though.
Oh, sure, it was interesting to watch, but if I'd have been in that position, I would have been scared to death of knocking somebody off and having to put up with all the embarrassment afterwards. But as you say, it was good fun to watch.
Roger Burnett is the leading point scorer at the moment, and it looks as if he's going to be odds on for that £5,000 prize.
Well, good luck to him. At the end of 1984, when I gave up racing, I fixed up for Roger to ride my bike, and he was my sort of tip for the top, if you like. And then last year he didn't get very good results with Honda because the two bikes were very different that he rode. And this year he's used to the bikes, used to the pressure, and I think this year he'll really come into his own.
You were telling me a little bit about how you used to combat the cold weather here, Barry, which sounds incredible. Just tell me that story.
Well, it's such an old pansy when it comes to the cold. I used to, on the bikes, we have a radiator in the front of to keep the engine cool. And I used to put pieces of pipe on the back of the radiator and duct it round onto my hands, just to keep my hands warm.
That sounds... I mean, didn't that add weight to the machine?
It did. The Japanese used to go mad, you know, because they were spending millions of pounds to make everything light, and I was putting 20 pounds on it in weight. But it's no use having a light bike if you can't ride it because your hands are too cold.
All right, well, I think we've got the 250cc race coming up very shortly.